My name's Daniel Thornton and I am the Head of Music and Creative Arts here at AC. This is the introductory video to Worship 101, Introduction to Worship Ministry. It is the core subject, or one of the core subjects of the worship major for the Bachelor of Ministry. And I am going to give you a bit of introduction to the learning outcomes, to the content, and to the assessments. And then you can dive on into the subject. Worship ministry, it's one of those terms that we use and we all kind of think we understand what we mean when we say it. In the context of a church, it definitely means that group of people who get together and who facilitate those gathered expressions, often of musical worship. Now, it's not just the people on the platform. Obviously, when we talk about ministry, it extends to people who are behind a sound desk, people who are behind, or running computer screens or lighting. It might be about the people who facilitate all that, the administrators of all of that. It could be the people who are on the platform, whether they be in a musical capacity or not. If they're facilitating worship, maybe all of that would come under worship ministry to one degree or another. So I guess just have a think when we're talking about worship ministry. Don't make the assumption that that everyone thinks what you think about that, but actually think through why we are using that term, what it means, and we'll help you to do that through some of the content that we're covering. Learning outcomes. There are 5 of them. The first one is summarize the biblical and theological foundations of worship. So this is really important because it takes us to that bigger frame, and it takes us to the historic frame. What we're doing in terms of church worship and as believers in worshiping is not just something we've come up with in the last 20 years. This is the church has expressed its worship to God for 2,000 years, since Christ came, since Christ died, was resurrected, the church was established. But even well before that, in the Old Testament, there's so much inspiration as we look at the way that people worshipped God and understood God and had a revelation of God and expressed their adoration, their reverence, and their love for God. So we're going to look at all of that. That's the first learning outcome. Second one is describe Christian expressions of worship in contemporary churches. So we move from that biblical foundation, theological foundations of worship, through to what are we doing now and how are we doing it. Number 3, examine the role of music and the arts in worship. So we're not just looking at music, we are more broadly looking at the arts. How are visual arts used in worship? How do we use drama? How do we use dance? How do we use media? All of these things play a role, and perhaps in different churches a differing value on those roles, but all of them have a part of an expression of worship to God, and we're going to look at how they work, both in a contemporary context and in a historical one. At least an overview, and that's all we can do in this unit, is kind of brush along the surface of a whole bunch of topics, which you can explore further in some of the elective units. So, for example, we have a specific unit that just focuses on worship arts and church history, which is fascinating to see how we've evolved in the way that we express our worship to God and how that interacts with our culture and all of that. But that's another unit. So, number 4, discuss the roles and responsibilities within worship ministry. So, who's there? What function do they have? What responsibilities do they have? What talent do they need? What character do they require? All of those kinds of questions. And finally, identify issues in developing a worship ministry. Well, if you've ever been involved in a worship ministry, you'll know there's issues. Hey, there's people, there's issues. So what are the common issues, and how do we approach those? How do we pastor people, lead people, work with a growing church, which hopefully you're a part of? All of that is covered in the subject content, and that's available in your subject outline. That's what I'm looking at here on my iPad. So make sure you have a good read of the subject outline. There's a couple of weeks on the Old Testament, a week on the New Testament. There's arts and music and arts in worship, contemporary Christian expressions of worship. We specifically spend a week on the song, just looking at the power of the song. And finally on roles and responsibilities and developing worship ministry. So there are there are 4 assessments that are connected to this subject. One is a 1,500 word case study. One is a 10-minute oral presentation. The major essay, which is worth 50%, 2,000 words. And finally some forum postings. So we'll start with the major essay. The major essay is exploring a biblical worship event or a passage that talks about worship from the Old or New Testament. So it could be something directly musical. You could pick the Psalms, or from Chronicles, where the temple is opened and the singers sing and trumpets blow and the glory of God comes down. It could be something more conceptual, when Abraham goes to sacrifice his son Isaac as an act of worship to God. You could explore something like that. So many options, so many expressions, whether in the Old or New Testaments. And so you'll need to engage with the sort of exegetical skills that you have to explore what the passage was really saying and how it relates to us, how it can apply to us today. The case study is about you going into your church or into some other local church that you choose and observing how they express their corporate worship. Look at the congregation, look at the way that they interact, explore how spontaneous or how structured those moments are. Think about what music is being provided to support those expressions of corporate worship. Think about stage, lighting, seating arrangements, projection. There's so many things. So it does require you for at least one Sunday to kind of step out of just getting lost in worshiping God and actually observing and critically observing, not being critical, but asking the question why. Step back and go, yes, I know that they do this, but why? What's the underlying values? What's the underlying framework of why this would be in a service, or why this would be done the way that it's being done? Oral presentation. You will choose one of the questions that's on offer in the oral presentation. So it's you get to work with your strengths maybe. So you can choose to address either what role does music play in corporate worship, how can God be explored through the visual arts, how is the tension between familiar and the new managed in corporate worship, or what aspects of popular culture impact on corporate worship worship culture, and are they positive or negative? So lots of options there for a 10-minute oral presentation, and if you can put a few examples or PowerPoints or things that help you present that would be great. It is only worth 25%, but hey, you always want to do your best, right? Finally, there are forum postings, and each week there'll be articles, journal articles, book chapters, other texts that you can read and interact with and talk about on the forums, and then sort of use that as a place to discuss with other students their perspectives and thoughts on those texts. Voila! That is Worship 101, Introduction to Worship Ministry. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope it really inspires you to perhaps look at some of those other worship units and explore deeper what it is that we're created by God to do as human beings and as believers. God bless.